Saint Carlo Acutis was born on May 3, 1991 in London, where his parents were working, but they soon returned to Milan in Italy, where little Carlo grew up. From an early age, he showed an uncommon spiritual sensitivity. While other children were distracted with games and play, Carlo seemed to have a heart turned upward, a gaze that sought the eternal. His mother, Antonia Salzano, admitted that before Carlo's birth she was not very practicing, but it was precisely through her son that she rediscovered the faith. She used to say that he was her little missionary, because even without words, Carlo's purity and joy spoke of God with intensity. In childhood, Carlo was like any boy his age. He loved animals, played soccer, and adored computers. However, there was something in him that set him apart profoundly, a simple and true love for Jesus. From a young age, he asked to visit churches and showed an unusual curiosity about the mystery of the Eucharist. When he made his first communion at the age of 7, something changed forever. He said that the Eucharist was his road to heaven. That phrase, so short and so profound, would become the center of his entire spiritual life. Every day, Carlo sought to receive Jesus at Mass, aware that this was the greatest encounter possible. Carlo's Eucharistic devotion was not theoretical. He lived each Mass with a fervor that impressed even adults. He liked to remain in silence before the tabernacle, contemplating, praying, offering his small sacrifices. While many his age allowed themselves to be carried away by distraction, he remained there in adoration, as if speaking with a very close friend. In fact, for him, Jesus was a real, living, present friend. He used to say that being with Jesus is like being before the sun. The longer you stay, the more you are illuminated. His parents perceived that there was something extraordinary in their son, but without any exaggeration or mysticism. Carlo was cheerful, playful, studious, and had many friends. At school, he was loved by everyone. He was not ashamed to say he was Catholic, and even when he was mocked, he maintained a serene smile. That authenticity won people over. He did not preach with speeches, but with example. His way of being was a reflection of the inner purity that radiated from his soul. He had a simple way of evangelizing, to be good, joyful, and coherent. Carlo's life was also deeply marked by Our Lady. He prayed the Rosary every day, never missing. He said that whoever places himself under the mantle of the Mother of God never gets lost. He especially liked to meditate on the sorrowful mysteries, contemplating the sacrifice of Jesus. For him, the Christian life was a journey of love, not of obligation. Prayer was not a burden, but a conversation between friends. And thus, in the simplicity of childhood, God was already preparing the heart of the one who would be called the cyber apostle of the Eucharist. Carlo also stood out for a generous heart. When he saw someone in need, he tried to help, even with small gestures. If he had money saved, he spent it on the poor, not on toys. His compassionate gaze was deep, and he said that to see the face of Christ in the poor was a way of honoring Jesus himself. This social sensitivity, united to his deep faith, showed that holiness was not a distant idea, but something possible and concrete in daily life. As the years went by, Carlo began to understand that holiness was everyone's calling. He often said, "Everyone is born as an original, but many die as copies." This phrase expressed his conviction that each person is created by God for a unique and unrepeatable mission. He wanted to live his vocation of love to the full, even in small things, obeying his parents, studying with dedication, being faithful to prayer. Holiness for him was a joyful path made of daily fidelity. Carlo had a special fondness for technology, something natural for a boy of his time, but what set him apart was the way he used that gift. While many used the internet for distractions, Carlo saw it as a tool for evangelization. He said the internet was a gift from God if used well, and he wanted to make it an instrument for good to bring Jesus to more people. Thus, while still a teenager, he began to create a grand project, to catalogue all the Eucharistic miracles in the world. This project was born from his passion for the Eucharist and his technological skill. He spent hours programming, researching, organizing photos and texts without neglecting what was essential, his life of prayer. He knew that what he did was not for his own glory, but for God's. The website he created is still accessed by millions of people today and has become one of the largest traveling exhibitions on the Eucharist in the world. All this was done by a young man who, to human eyes, seemed ordinary. This childhood and adolescence, marked by a living faith and a sincere love for Christ, made Carlo a luminous example for the modern world. At a time when so many young people seek meaning in passing things, he showed that the true meaning of life is in God. The holiness of Carlo Acutis began in the simplicity of childhood and blossomed in youth, with the fragrance of purity and the radiance of grace. His story is proof that even in the digital age, it is possible to be a saint. Adolescence is usually a period of turbulence and discovery, in which many young people drift away from the faith and allow themselves to be carried by the distractions of the world. With Carlo Acutis, however, the opposite happened. The more he grew, the closer he drew to God. His spiritual maturity was striking. At the age of 12, he already lived an intense sacramental life. He went to Mass every day, went to confession weekly, and prayed the Rosary with love and devotion. He said that the Eucharist is my highway to heaven. This phrase, which he repeated with conviction, summed up his entire spirituality and the meaning of his life. He understood the Eucharistic mystery with the depth of a mystic and the simplicity of a child. Carlo saw in the Eucharist Jesus himself, living and present, and that certainty guided all his actions. When he left Mass, he radiated joy, like someone who had found the greatest treasure. He used to say that the more we receive the Eucharist, the more we become like Jesus. For him, communion was the food of the soul, the strength to love, the center of existence. It was common to see him kneeling before the tabernacle, praying in silence for long minutes, his eyes fixed on the tabernacle. He said that there he truly felt at home, because before Jesus, one is never alone. His schoolmates admired him for his serenity and kindness. Even though he was very intelligent and skilled with computers, Carlo never boasted. He had a natural humility, the fruit of his intimacy with God. When a friend faced difficulties, he was the first to draw near, to listen, to console. He judged no one, and his presence brought peace. He believed that the love of Christ is manifested in every small gesture, and he sought to live this charity every day. When he saw someone sad, he made a point of smiling. When he noticed injustices, he did not remain silent. Faith made him strong, but without ever losing gentleness. His devotion to the Eucharist also led him to a deep love for priests and for the Church. He said that after the Eucharist, the greatest gift God has given us is the priesthood. He prayed frequently for priests and was saddened when he heard criticism of the Church. For him, the Church was a mother who welcomes and cares, even with her human wounds. Carlo understood, with wisdom impressive for his age, that the Christian should not abandon the Church because of the sins of men, but remain faithful out of love for Christ. This love for the Church and for the Eucharist made him a true apostle in the midst of the digital world. The great work of his youth was the project on Eucharistic miracles. Carlo spent months researching, studying, organizing material on each miracle recognized by the Church. His desire was simple but grand, to make more people believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. He himself said, "People stand in line for hours to watch a concert or a movie, but they don't dedicate even 5 minutes to Jesus in the tabernacle." This observation so direct and sincere, revealed the missionary heart of a young man who understood the urgency of evangelizing his time. He wanted to use the internet to show that God is alive. At just 15, Carlo created a virtual exhibition with more than 130 Eucharistic miracles catalogued, translated into several languages, with maps and images. The project quickly spread across the world, becoming a traveling exhibition that toured dozens of countries. What is striking is that everything was done without any desire for fame. Carlo only wanted people to fall in love with Jesus. He said, "Holiness is not a question of age, but of love." That love moved him in everything, and his faith was contagious, especially among the young. Despite living in an era dominated by superficiality and social media, Carlo managed to be in the world without belonging to the world. He used technology, but did not allow himself to be dominated by it. He limited the use of the computer and television, saying that we should not waste the time God has given us on things that take us away from Him. And this awareness of the value of time was one of the marks of his life. He knew that each day was an opportunity to love more, to become holy, to serve. Time, for Carlo, was too precious a gift to be squandered on trivialities. Joy was another striking trait of his personality. Carlo lived with a smile on his face and a lightness of soul that impressed. Not because he had no problems, but because he trusted God completely. When something did not go right, he said, "God is our GPS. If we take the wrong route, He recalculates the path." This simple metaphor shows the depth of his faith and his understanding of divine love. He knew that God leads everything for the good of those who love Him. Therefore, he did not let himself be overcome by setbacks. He lived with hope and transmitted that hope to others. Carlo also had a special devotion to the guardian angels. He prayed daily for protection and guidance. He said that the angel was the best traveling companion to heaven. At a time when so many young people feel alone, he found in Catholic spirituality a constant companionship. He saw in the invisible a reality more concrete than what could be touched. This deep faith made him, even as a young person, a true modern mystic, an example that holiness is current, accessible, alive, and luminous. In the last years of his life, Carlo intensified even more his devotion to the Eucharist. He participated in Mass every day, adored the Blessed Sacrament frequently, and encouraged his friends to do the same. He said that if people knew what the Mass is, they would have to line up to get in. His faith was an invitation to conversion. He was not content to be a good Christian. He wanted everyone to find the joy he had found in Christ. Therefore, each gesture, each word, each smile of his became a reflection of God's presence. His youth was brief, but lived fully in holiness. At 15, at the height of youth, Carlo Acutis began to feel tired, with constant fevers and body aches that would not go away. His parents, worried, took him to the doctor, believing it would only be a strong flu. However, the diagnosis was devastating. Fulminant leukemia, type M3, one of the most aggressive forms of the disease. In a few days, Carlo understood that his time on earth would be brief. And far from despairing, he accepted the news with impressive serenity. He said to his mother with a gaze full of light, "I offer all my sufferings to the Lord, for the Pope and for the Church, so I won't have to go to purgatory and will go straight to heaven." This phrase, so simple and profound, reveals the spiritual maturity of a true saint. From the beginning of the illness, Carlo did not complain. On the contrary, he said that each pain was an opportunity to unite himself more to the crucified Christ. He only asked that no one suffer because of him. He wanted everyone to remain serene, trusting in God. The doctors were surprised by his calm in the face of pain. Even amid strong treatments and hospitalizations, Carlo kept his good humor and smile. When someone visited him, he asked, "Are you well? Are you praying?" His concern was always for others, never for himself. What for many would be despair, for him was an altar of offering. During his days in the hospital, Carlo maintained his spiritual routine as much as he could. He carried his rosary, prayed, meditated on the mysteries of Christ's life. He said that suffering, when accepted with love, becomes a spiritual treasure. He understood the cross as a gift, not as a punishment. For him, suffering had meaning because it united him to Jesus, who also suffered out of love. "The Lord has given me much more than I deserve," he said, with a serenity that deeply touched those who heard him. Nurses testified that upon entering his room, they felt peace. It was as if that teenager transformed the hospital into a small sanctuary. Even weak, Carlo did not stop evangelizing. He spoke to the nurses about the importance of going to confession, of attending Mass, of trusting in God. One nurse reported that he told her, "You should draw near to the sacraments because they help you be closer to Jesus." These simple words planted seeds in many hearts. Carlo saw in each person a beloved child of God and wanted everyone to know that love. His mission, which began on the internet, was now fulfilled in the bed of pain, with the silent witness of faith lived to the end. His parents were deeply moved by their son's serenity. His mother recalls that in his last days he repeated, "Mama, do not be afraid. Jesus is my only desire." These words sounded like an echo from the soul of a saint. Carlo saw death not as an end, but as the beginning of true life. He said that heaven awaits us, and every minute here is a preparation for there. This conviction made him unbeatable in the face of pain. When his body was already weakened, he still found the strength to smile and console those around him. Before he died, Carlo asked his parents for two favors. The first, that they not spend money on flowers at his funeral, but help the poor. The second, that he be buried in Assisi, the city of St. Francis, whom he loved so much. He said that Assisi is the place where I feel most at home. These requests show his detachment and his love for evangelical poverty. He wanted to the end to live like a true disciple of Christ in humility and service. His parents fulfilled his wishes with tears, but also with gratitude for having been witnesses to such luminous holiness. On October 12, 2006, the day the Church celebrates Our Lady of Aparecida, Carlo Acutis departed for heaven. He was only 15 years old. His face, at the moment of death, seemed serene, almost smiling, like someone falling asleep in the arms of God. The news of his death spread quickly and caused great commotion. Friends, teachers, priests, and strangers united in prayer. Everyone felt that they had not lost a young man, but gained an intercessor in heaven. His funeral was a mixture of tears and hope. It was impossible not to perceive that something sacred had manifested in that brief life. The days following his death were marked by testimonies of conversion and graces. Many who had known him began to pray with greater fervor, to go to confession, to attend Mass. His website about Eucharistic miracles began to be visited even more, and many people reported spiritual and physical healings after asking for his intercession. Carlo had said that, from heaven, he would continue his work of evangelization. And indeed, his influence grew exponentially after his death. Holiness, which he said was the fastest shortcut to happiness, now shone strongly through his example. In Assisi, his body was buried with simplicity as he wished. Years later, when he was exhumed, his body was found incorrupt, wearing jeans, sneakers, and a sweatshirt. The same clothing he wore in life, a symbol of a saint of modern times. That image moved the world. For the first time, Many realized that holiness is also possible in the digital age, in the midst of youth, in everyday life. Carlo became a prophetic sign that God's grace acts in all times, even in the 21st century. Carlo's suffering was brief, but profoundly fruitful. His life, marked by the cross, showed that love is stronger than pain. He lived the illness as a path of purification, offering everything to God with love and trust. He did not seek miracles for himself, but desired that his life be a miracle for others. And so it was. His total surrender to Christ in suffering is a testimony that echoes in the hearts of all who suffer, reminding them that the cross, when embraced with faith, is transformed into light. After his death, the reputation of sanctity of Carlo Acutis spread quickly throughout Italy and soon after, throughout the world. The people who had known him bore witness to his serene smile, his goodness, and his deep faith in God. Many young people began to draw inspiration from his simple yet extraordinary life. In a short time, Carlo came to be known as the Cyber Apostle of the Eucharist, a title that perfectly expresses his mission, to bring the love of Jesus in the Eucharist to people through technology. He had used the internet, so marked by distractions and vices, as an instrument of evangelization. And now, from heaven, that mission multiplied in an even more powerful way. The Church began to receive countless reports of graces obtained through Carlo's intercession. People with serious illnesses said they had experienced healings after asking for his prayers. Young people who had been far from the faith began to return to the Church, inspired by his story. Many priests testified to long confessions of the faithful, touched by his example. The website he had created about Eucharistic miracles became a portal of faith, visited by millions of people worldwide. It was as if God continued to act through that teenager who had always wanted to do good. The seed planted by Carlo began to blossom abundantly. One of the miracles, officially recognized by the Church for Carlo's beatification process, took place in Brazil, in Campo Grande, Mato Grosso do Sul. A boy of only 6 years old, who suffered from a rare anomaly of the pancreas and could not feed himself, was completely healed after touching a relic of Carlo and the family praying for his intercession. The case was studied by a medical and theological team of the Vatican and, without scientific explanation, was recognized as a miracle. Pope Francis himself confirmed the authenticity of the healing and approved the decree of beatification. Thus, an Italian youth and a Brazilian boy were mystically united in the history of faith, showing that holiness knows no borders. On October 10, 2020, Carlo Acutis was beatified in the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi in a ceremony that moved the world. The young man's body, displayed in a glass reliquary, wore the simple clothes he used in life: jeans, sneakers, and a sweatshirt, reminding everyone that holiness is possible in the midst of ordinary life. During the homily, Cardinal Agostino Vallini, the Pope's representative, declared, "Carlo Acutis was a model of joy, of simplicity, and of great love for the Eucharist." The image of that smiling teenager, resting serenely in Assisi, deeply touched the hearts of the faithful of all ages. Pope Francis, on several occasions, mentioned Carlo as an example for modern youth. In the apostolic exhortation, Christus Vivit, the Holy Father highlighted, the young blessed Carlo Acutis knew how to use new technologies to transmit the gospel, placing them at the service of Christ. This phrase of the Pope echoed throughout the world and awakened a new generation of Catholics, aware that faith and technology are not enemies, but can walk together when guided by the love of God. Carlo thus became the patron of internet users, programmers, and all those who seek to evangelize in the digital world. After his beatification, thousands of pilgrims began to visit his tomb in Assisi. Young people from various parts of the planet left letters, objects, rosaries, and promises before his urn. Many reported conversions, family reconciliations, and spiritual rebirths. The place became a true sanctuary of youth, a meeting point between faith and modernity. The city of St. Francis, which once welcomed the Poverello of Assisi, now also welcomed the young saint of the digital age. The same love that united Francis and Carlo, the ardent love for Christ and for the Eucharist, continued to transform lives centuries later. But Carlo's greatest legacy was not technological, but spiritual. He showed that holiness is not the privilege of a few, but the vocation of all. His life teaches that it is possible to live in the world without being corrupted by it. It shows that it is possible to use the computer, the cell phone, and the internet in a holy way, with purity of intention and love for God. Carlo said that sadness is looking at oneself, happiness is looking at God. This phrase sums up his philosophy of life and the secret of his joy, placing Christ at the center of everything. He lived only 15 years, but his life had the weight and depth of an eternal soul. The impact of his story was so great that many young people began to organize themselves into prayer and evangelization groups inspired by his example. On social networks, profiles dedicated to spreading his message multiplied. Churches and schools created catechetical projects bearing his name. His figure became a symbol of a new springtime of faith among young Catholics. In a world thirsty for authenticity, Carlo became the face of a youth unafraid of being holy. He said, "The closer we draw to the Eucharist, the more we become like Jesus, and on earth, we already experience heaven." Carlo's legacy also reached families. Many parents, touched by his story, rediscovered the importance of educating their children in the faith. His own mother, Antonia, became a living witness of God's love, giving talks and participating in events in various parts of the world, carrying her son's message. She often says that Carlo was a visible sign of an invisible love. This expression summarizes the mission of that young man, who even after death continues to bring light and hope to millions of hearts. The holiness of Carlo Acutis is a reminder that God does not demand the impossible. He only asks that we do the ordinary with extraordinary love. Carlo did not accomplish great feats in the eyes of the world, but he lived the gospel with radicality and joy, and that is what made him a saint. His legacy remains like a lit flame, especially among young people who wish to live the faith in a true way. He proved that it is possible to be modern without being worldly, to use the internet without losing one's soul, and to live holiness in the 21st century with a heart turned to the eternal. Carlo Acutis lived in an age marked by the speed of information, the culture of image, and the fascination with technology. However, unlike so many young people who get lost in virtual distractions, he discovered a singular way to transform the digital environment into fertile ground for evangelization. In his view, the internet was not an enemy of faith, but a powerful instrument that could serve the good if used with wisdom and purity of intention. He said that the internet can be used as an instrument for the glory of God, and he saw in this a personal mission to flood the virtual world with the light of the gospel. At a time of cold screens and distracted hearts, Carlo managed to unite the digital and the divine. The spiritual revolution that Carlo initiated did not come with eloquent words or great speeches, but with coherence of life. He used technology as an extension of his soul. While many saw the web as a place of vanity and competition, he saw a mission field. He programmed websites, organized data, studied computer languages, and in all this, he saw an opportunity to speak of God. His website on Eucharistic miracles became an example of how faith and intelligence can walk together. Carlo said, "Miracles are signs of God's love that invite us to believe." His digital exhibition, which today travels the continents, is the living testimony of an apostle who knew how to transform the keyboard into a rosary and the screen into an altar. For Carlo, the true digital revolution had to begin in the heart. He said that holiness is the software we must install in the soul so as not to be infected by sin. He spoke of this in the language of his time, making the gospel accessible to young people who grew up surrounded by technology. He was aware that the modern world offered countless temptations, pornography, selfishness, superficiality, but he believed that the grace of God was stronger than any algorithm of evil. Therefore, he sought to teach by example that purity is not weakness, and that living in a state of grace is the greatest power a young person can have. For him, sin was a virus, and confession was the antivirus that restored the soul. Carlo understood that the digital world needed authentic witnesses, not empty speeches. He did not limit himself to talking about God. He lived what he said. In games, on social networks, in conversations with friends, he always maintained a tone of goodness, respect, and light. He avoided gossip, did not share content that could hurt someone, and never used the internet to show off. He said that the more we allow ourselves to be loved by God, the more our life becomes a reflection of His love. This was his digital logic. Instead of seeking likes, he sought souls. Instead of followers, he sought disciples of Christ. His online presence was an extension of his Eucharistic communion. Carlo's influence went beyond physical space and penetrated deeply into the culture of communication. Many scholars of the religious phenomenon call him the first influencer of God. However, unlike the influencers of the world, he did not promote his own image, but that of Christ. His life shows that being holy in the 21st century means being coherent, even when no one is watching. In times of appearances and filters, Carlo reminded us that the greatest filter is God's gaze, which sees the heart. His authenticity attracted crowds, precisely because there was no contradiction in him between faith and life. He became a silent answer to a generation thirsty for meaning. The revolution Carlo initiated is also a call to the digital responsibility of Christians. He believed that every click and every word carry moral weight, and that the internet can be a field of sin or of grace, depending on the intention with which it is used. Therefore, he insisted that holiness does not consist in doing extraordinary things, but in doing the ordinary in an extraordinary way. For him, this included the way one navigates, what one posts, what one comments. The digital world, he said, is a mirror of the human soul, and each Christian must reflect the light of Christ there. This spiritual and modern vision made him a pioneer of a new form of evangelization, an evangelization that crosses cables, codes, and hearts. Carlo's example inspired an entire generation of young Catholics who decided to use social networks as instruments of faith. Many began to create content about the Eucharist, the lives of the saints, Marian devotion and prayer, citing Carlo as a reference. At a time when faith seemed distant from the young, he showed that holiness is possible in any environment, including the digital. Technology in the hands of those who love God becomes a sacrament of good. Carlo proved that being modern and being holy are not opposing realities, but complementary ones. Modernity, when illuminated by faith, can become a path of salvation. Carlo's digital revolution also manifested itself in how he inspired the Church to dialogue with the modern world. Priests, religious and lay people began to understand that evangelizing the networks is an urgent mission. Carlo's example became a pastoral reference, reminding that the gospel must also be proclaimed in virtual spaces, where millions of souls seek answers. His witness rekindled in the Church the desire to bring the language of the altar closer to the language of the internet, to unite tradition and innovation without losing the essence of the faith. He showed that it is possible to be faithful to the magisterium and at the same time communicate the truth with creativity. At the heart of this revolution is love for the Eucharist. Carlo never distanced himself from his spiritual source. His entire digital life was sustained by his sacramental life. He said, "The Eucharist is my road to heaven," and that road also passed through fiber optics, through computers, and through the websites he created. Technology for him was a gift from God, and like every gift, it had to be sanctified by love. Carlo showed the world that holiness can be clicked, shared, and lived in real time. He not only used the internet, he consecrated it, transforming it into a channel of grace. Today, Carlo's revolution continues. His example echoes in generations that see in him a sign of hope amid the noise of the digital world. He is the reminder that God is not absent from modernity, but waits to be found even on the screens. Carlo Acutis proved that it is possible to be young, technological, and profoundly holy. And his life challenges us to ask, how are we using the gifts that God has given us? Because as he himself said, sadness is born when we look at ourselves. Happiness begins when we look at God. This is Carlo's revolution, to make the digital world a mirror of heaven. The life of Saint Carlo Acutis did not end with his death. It only changed form. What began as the silent witness of a young Italian became a universal message, capable of touching hearts on every continent. In an increasingly fragmented world where young people seek identity and purpose, Carlo stands as a beacon of meaning. He proves that holiness is possible without abandoning youth, without ceasing to be cheerful, modern, or creative. The true revolution he initiated was interior, a revolution of love, of coherence, and of living faith. His message is not only for Catholics, but for all who sincerely seek the truth. Saint Carlo reminds youth that a person's true worth is not in appearance, fame, or achievements, but in the capacity to love. At a time when so many are lost in the quest for recognition on social networks, he shows us that only God can fill the emptiness of the human heart. Carlo said that whoever stands before the Son of the Eucharist becomes luminous. This image sums up his spirituality, the young man who found in the real presence of Christ the source of authentic happiness. He teaches that holiness is not something distant, but a concrete goal for those who live with a heart turned to God. The youth of Saint Carlo Acutis is a mirror in which today's young people can see themselves reflected. He loved video games, technology, friends, and sports. He was not a young man isolated from the world, but a Christian inserted in it, living the faith in a natural and contagious way. His difference was not in what he did, but in how he did it. Everything with love, everything with purity, everything for God. Carlo transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary because he lived each day as an opportunity for sanctification. His life is proof that being holy does not mean fleeing the world, but illuminating it. It is the holiness that is born of daily life, of duties well fulfilled, and of the joy of loving. Carlo's message is also an invitation to coherence and authenticity. He never hid his faith to please others, but he also never imposed it with arrogance. He evangelized naturally, with small gestures, with his serenity. He said that sadness is looking at oneself, happiness is looking at God. This phrase, so simple, is a program of life. In times of anxiety and depression, Carlo points to the path of spiritual healing, to go out of oneself and turn one's gaze to divine love. He did not live in search of applause, but of souls. His greatest joy was to see others drawing near to the Eucharist and discovering the hidden treasure on the altar. Saint Carlo also leaves a profound appeal to families. He reminds parents that faith is learned first at home, and that example speaks louder than any word. It was his own mother who witnessed spiritual transformation through her son. He, with his simple and holy life, rekindled the flame of faith in his home. This is one of Carlo's greatest miracles, showing that children can lead parents to God. At a time when so many homes live without prayer, without dialogue, and without spirituality, his story is a reminder that family love is the first ground where holiness germinates. But perhaps the most urgent message of Saint Carlo Acutis is the call to Eucharistic adoration. He said that the Eucharist is my road to heaven, and not just as a beautiful phrase, but as a lived truth. His life was centered on the real presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. For him, the secret of happiness lay in intimacy with Jesus in the Eucharist. And this is what he asks of young people today, that they find time to be before God, that they rediscover the value of Mass, of confession, and of prayer. Carlo teaches that, amid the noise of the world, the heart finds peace only in the silence of the divine presence. Carlo's message also echoes as an antidote to the moral and spiritual relativism of our time. He was not afraid to affirm that truth exists and that it has a name, Jesus Christ. For him, following Christ was the most logical, most beautiful, and most intelligent choice one could make. He said that to be always united to Jesus is my life plan. This union was not theoretical, but practical, made of daily fidelity, of love for the Church, and of service to neighbor. He lived like a soldier of light, combating evil with the purity of heart and the good he did discreetly, without fanfare. Carlo showed that Christian heroism is silent but powerful. Today, Saint Carlo Acutis speaks to a generation that is connected, but often disconnected from itself. He is a reminder that the soul also needs a connection, not with a Wi-Fi network, but with the heart of God. His witness is a bridge between heaven and the internet, between the altar and the screen, between holiness and modernity. The young saint of the digital age is the sign that grace can dwell in any environment, even on social networks, provided that the heart is anchored in prayer. He is living proof that God continues to choose simple instruments to accomplish extraordinary works. Saint Carlo's call is also a challenge for the whole Church, to evangelize without fear, with creativity and fidelity. He showed that it is not necessary to be a priest, theologian, or missionary to lead souls to God. It is enough to be faithful in the place where you are. Carlo lived the gospel at school, on the internet, in games, in friendships. His holiness is accessible, practical, and profoundly human. He teaches that every Christian is called to be a reflection of the divine light, and that the mission of every baptized person is to sanctify his own time. His life is a manual on how to live the 21st century without losing one's soul. Finally, Saint Carlo Acutis leaves us a promise and a challenge. Happiness is looking at God. The more we are united to Him, the more we become saints. This is the synthesis of his short but brilliant existence. He lived little, but he lived intensely for heaven. His presence remains among us as a reminder that holiness is real, near, and possible. Carlo is not only an example, he is a friend, an intercessor, a model of hope for young people all over the world. And just as he promised, he continues evangelizing from heaven, showing that God's love has no borders and that true paradise begins when we let God be the center of our lives.